The helicopter blades chopped through the thick Afghan air as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos checked her medical supplies one final time. The metal bird descended toward the remote outpost where a Navy SEAL team had requested immediate medical evacuation. 3 wounded, the radio had crackled, priority 1. Maria's hands moved with practiced efficiency, organizing bandages, morphine, and trauma kits in the cramped medical bay. At 28, Maria had seen more combat zones than most soldiers twice her age, though she never spoke about her early deployments. Her personnel file listed her as a combat medic with standard training, nothing more. The truth was buried deep in classified folders that few had clearance to access. As far as her current unit knew, she was just another skilled medic doing her job. The helicopter touched down in a swirl of dust and debris. Maria grabbed her gear and sprinted toward the concrete bunker where the SEALs waited. The first thing that struck her was the silence. These elite warriors, known for their unshakable composure, stood frozen around their wounded teammates. Their faces showed something Maria rarely saw in special operations soldiers: genuine shock and uncertainty. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, the team leader, approached her with quick steps. His tactical vest was stained with blood, though whether it was his own or someone else's remained unclear. "Doc, we've got 3 down. 2 with shrapnel wounds, 1 with what looks like internal bleeding. But there's something else you need to know." His voice carried an edge that made Maria's instincts sharpen. She knelt beside the first wounded SEAL, a young operator named Rodriguez who was conscious but pale. Shrapnel had torn through his shoulder and upper arm. As Maria began cutting away his uniform to assess the damage, she noticed the way the other team members watched her. Not with the usual mixture of hope and anxiety that accompanied medical treatment, but with something closer to recognition. It made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't quite identify. The second wounded SEAL was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. Maria quickly identified multiple fragment wounds across his torso and began working to stabilize him for transport. Her movements were swift and sure, the result of countless hours treating combat injuries under fire. She barely registered the murmured conversations happening around her as the conscious SEALs spoke in low, urgent tones. It was the third casualty that changed everything. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb lay on his back, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Maria began her assessment, checking pulse, breathing, and looking for obvious wounds. What she found made her freeze for just a moment, a tattoo on his forearm that she recognized. It was the unit insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, specifically the marking used by a special reconnaissance unit that had operated in Iraq years earlier. Webb's eyes fluttered open as Maria worked on him. Through his pain-induced haze, he focused on her face with difficulty. Something clicked in his expression, a spark of recognition that made him try to sit up despite his injuries. "Santos?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Maria Santos? Is that really you?" The question hit Maria like a physical blow. She continued working on his wounds, but her hands trembled slightly now. Around her, the other SEALs had gone completely silent. Even Lieutenant Commander Morrison had stopped giving orders, instead watching the exchange with intense focus. "Stay still," Maria told Webb firmly, pressing a compress against a bleeding wound in his abdomen. "You're hurt badly. Don't try to move." But even as she spoke, her mind raced backward through years she had worked hard to forget. The desert heat, the smell of cordite and burning fuel, the weight of a different uniform and a very different mission. Webb's hand reached up weakly and grasped her wrist. "I know it's you," he said with more strength now. "Afghanistan, 2018, the Kandahar operation. You were there, weren't you? You were with the unit that pulled us out when everything went wrong." The medical bay of the helicopter suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Maria's training kicked in, forcing her to continue treating Webb's injuries even as her past crashed into her present. She had spent 5 years building a new identity, a quieter role where she could use her skills to save lives without the weight of classified operations and buried secrets. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quietly, but her voice lacked conviction. Around her, she could feel the SEALs processing Webb's words, connecting dots that she had hoped would never be connected. Morrison stepped closer, his tactical mind clearly working through implications. "Santos, is there something we should know? Webb doesn't make mistakes about faces, especially not from operations that matter." Maria secured the last bandage on Webb's wound and reached for an IV kit. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered Webb now, younger then, a Navy corpsman attached to a joint special operations unit. He had been there the night everything changed. The night that had ended one chapter of her life and begun another. The helicopter engines were spinning up outside, the pilot ready for immediate departure to the nearest medical facility. Maria knew she had perhaps 10 minutes before they would be airborne. 10 minutes before this moment passed and became something she would have to deal with later. The wounded SEALs needed her full attention, but she could feel the weight of curious and suspicious stares from their teammates. "Doc?" Rodriguez spoke up from where he lay with his shoulder wound. "Webb's got one hell of a memory for faces. If he says he knows you from somewhere, he's usually right. Especially if it's from a mission that mattered." Maria finished inserting the IV into Webb's arm and began preparing him for transport. She could feel the moment stretching taut like a wire about to snap. These men were trained to read people, to spot deception and hidden truths. They had built their careers on trust and transparency within their brotherhood. The silence she had maintained for years was becoming impossible to sustain. As the medical team prepared to load the wounded SEALs into the helicopter, Maria caught Morrison's eye. In that look, she saw a mixture of professional concern and personal curiosity that told her this conversation was far from over. Whatever Webb remembered from that night in Afghanistan 5 years ago was about to change everything she had built since then. The rotors reached full speed, and Maria focused on keeping her patients stable for the flight ahead. But she knew that when they reached the medical facility, there would be questions she was no longer sure she could avoid answering. The flight to Bagram Airfield took 43 minutes, and Maria spent every second of it fighting memories she had buried deep. Webb drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time his eyes opened, they found her face with uncomfortable recognition. The other wounded SEALs remained stable, but she could feel the weight of unasked questions from Morrison, who sat across from her in the cramped helicopter bay. When they landed, Maria immediately threw herself into the familiar chaos of a military trauma center. She briefed the receiving doctors, helped transfer her patients to surgical teams, and completed the extensive paperwork that accompanied every medical evacuation. The routine gave her something to focus on besides the growing certainty that her carefully constructed new life was about to unravel. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief trauma surgeon at Bagram, found Maria in the break room 3 hours later. They had worked together for 18 months, and Chen had always respected Maria's quiet competence and steady nerves under pressure. Now, however, the surgeon's expression carried professional concern mixed with personal curiosity. "Your patients are all stable," Chen reported, settling into the plastic chair across from Maria. "Webb's surgery went well. The internal bleeding wasn't as severe as we initially thought. Rodriguez and Patterson should be back to light duty within a few weeks." She paused, studying Maria's face. "But there's something else. Lieutenant Commander Morrison has been asking questions about you." Maria's coffee had gone cold in her hands. She set the cup down carefully, buying herself a moment to think. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he thinks you have a history with his team that isn't in your official record." Chen leaned forward. "Maria, in all the time we've worked together, you've never mentioned any previous special operations experience. Your file says standard infantry medic training, then advanced trauma certification. Nothing about working with SEALs or Rangers." Through the window, Maria could see Morrison talking with 2 other officers she didn't recognize. Their posture and bearing suggested military intelligence, the kind of people who specialized in verifying stories and uncovering hidden connections. Her stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. "There are things in my past that are classified," Maria said finally. "Things I can't discuss, even with friends." Chen nodded slowly. "I figured as much. But Morrison isn't going to let this go. He's protective of his team, and if he thinks you have information that could be relevant to their safety or their missions, he'll keep pushing until he gets answers." Before Maria could respond, a knock on the break room door interrupted them. Morrison entered without waiting for permission, his expression serious but not hostile. Behind him stood a woman in Army fatigues with Major's insignia and the distinctive beret of Special Operations Command. "Staff Sergeant Santos," Morrison said formally. "This is Major Patricia Williams from Joint Special Operations Command. She'd like to speak with you privately about your conversation with Petty Officer Webb." Major Williams was younger than Maria had expected, probably in her early 30s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from years of handling sensitive information. She dismissed Chen with a polite nod and waited until the door closed before speaking. "Sergeant Santos, I've been reviewing your personnel file, and I have to say it's interesting reading." Williams pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be multiple documents. "Your current assignment shows 2 years as a combat medic with the 10th Mountain Division. Before that, there's a gap of about 8 months listed as medical leave and retraining. Prior to that gap, your record becomes quite sparse." Maria remained silent, knowing that anything she said could either help or hurt her situation, depending on how much Williams already knew. Morrison shifted uncomfortably.
"Major, with respect, I just want to know if Santos has any information that could be relevant to my team's safety."
Webb seemed to recognize her from a previous operation. Williams held up a hand. "I understand your concern, Lieutenant Commander, but this requires careful handling." She turned back to Maria. "Sergeant, I'm going to be direct. Petty Officer Webb mentioned the Kandahar operation from 2018. That particular mission is still classified at the highest levels. If you were involved in that operation, there are protocols we need to follow." The room fell silent except for the distant sound of helicopters and the steady hum of the medical facility's air conditioning. Maria felt the walls closing in around her, the careful distance she had maintained from her past shrinking by the minute. "I can't discuss classified operations without proper authorization," Maria said carefully, "even if I wanted to." Williams smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "That's exactly the answer I would expect from someone who was involved in classified operations. The question is, which operations and in what capacity?" Morrison stepped forward. "Major, my men trust each other with their lives. If Santos has special operations experience that could be valuable to my team, shouldn't we know about it? Webb said something about a unit that pulled them out when everything went wrong. That sounds like the kind of experience we could use." "It's not that simple," Williams replied. "Some operations create complications that last for years. Some soldiers choose quieter assignments afterward for very good reasons." She looked directly at Maria. "Isn't that right, Sergeant?" The weight of their attention was becoming unbearable. Maria had chosen her current assignment specifically because it allowed her to use her medical skills without the constant pressure and moral ambiguity of special operations. She had wanted to save lives without having to take them, to serve without having to bury parts of herself that she wasn't sure she could live with. "I requested transfer to a standard medical unit because I wanted to focus on healing rather than fighting," Maria said finally. "My previous assignments were demanding in ways that affected my personal well-being." Morrison's expression softened slightly. He had seen enough good soldiers burn out from the stress of special operations to understand what Maria might be describing. "Santos, I'm not trying to force you back into something you don't want. But Webb is convinced you saved his life once before. If there's a chance you could help my team stay alive and complete our missions, I have to explore that possibility." Williams closed her tablet with a decisive snap. "I think we need to take this conversation to a more secure location. Sergeant Santos, you're not in trouble. But there are people who need to verify some information before we can proceed. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, your team will remain at Bagram until this is resolved." As they prepared to leave the break room, Maria caught sight of herself in the small mirror by the door. She looked tired, older than her 28 years, and something in her eyes reminded her of the person she had been before she chose silence over truth. The reflection told her that running from the past had always been temporary, and that Webb's recognition was just the beginning of a reckoning she had postponed rather than avoided. The corridors of Bagram seemed longer as they walked toward whatever conversation awaited her, and Maria found herself wondering if the price of keeping her secrets had finally become higher than the cost of telling the truth. The secure briefing room at Bagram was windowless and sterile, with white walls that seemed to absorb sound and emotion equally. Major Williams activated a device that would prevent electronic surveillance, then settled across from Maria at a metal table that had seen countless similar conversations. Morrison remained standing near the door, his arms crossed but his posture more curious than threatening. "Before we begin," Williams said, "I want you to know that nothing you say here will be used against you. This is about verification and understanding, not punishment." She opened a thick folder that Maria recognized as the kind used for highly classified personnel records. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, formerly Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, 75th Ranger Regiment, attached to Special Operations Task Force North from 2017 to 2019. The words hung in the air like smoke from an old fire suddenly reignited. Maria felt something inside her chest tighten, a familiar sensation she associated with mission briefings and pre-combat stress. Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent. The Kandahar operation that Petty Officer Webb mentioned, Williams continued, was a joint rescue mission involving multiple special operations units. The official record shows that a Navy SEAL reconnaissance team was compromised during a high-value target capture mission. They were pinned down for 18 hours before a quick reaction force could extract them. Maria's hands remained folded on the table, but her knuckles had gone white. She remembered the mission with painful clarity. The radio calls for help, the desperate planning session, the weight of her gear as they moved through the darkness toward the sound of gunfire. Morrison leaned forward. Webb mentioned a unit that pulled them out. He said someone performed emergency surgery on him under fire while his team was being extracted. The quick reaction force included a Ranger reconnaissance team with an attached combat medic, Williams said, her eyes fixed on Maria's face. That medic performed field surgery on 3 wounded SEALs while under enemy fire, then helped carry them to the extraction point. The operation was classified because it revealed intelligence capabilities that could not be compromised. The silence stretched between them like a bridge Maria wasn't sure she wanted to cross. For 5 years, she had maintained the fiction that her past was ordinary, unremarkable. The weight of keeping that secret had been manageable because it meant she could focus on healing, rather than fighting, on saving lives rather than taking them. "Why did you leave Special Operations?" Morrison asked gently. "From what Williams is describing, you were exactly the kind of soldier every team wants." Maria looked down at her hands, seeing scars she had explained away as training accidents. The truth was more complicated than Williams's clinical summary suggested. The Kandahar operation had been successful, but it had also been the breaking point in a career that had asked too much of her capacity for violence and moral compromise. "The mission saved your team," Maria said finally, meeting Morrison's eyes. "But it cost us 3 Rangers, good soldiers who died because we couldn't get to you fast enough." Her voice remained steady, but Morrison could hear the pain beneath the words. "After that, I realized I was better at saving lives than I was at the things Special Operations sometimes requires." Williams nodded, as if this explanation fit with information she already possessed. Sergeant Santos received commendations for her actions during the Kandahar operation, but she also submitted a request for transfer immediately afterward. Her psychological evaluation indicated combat stress and a desire to transition to a less demanding role. "But you stayed in the Army," Morrison observed. "You could have gotten out entirely." "I still wanted to serve," Maria said. "I just wanted to serve differently. As a medic in a conventional unit, I could focus on keeping people alive without having to make the kind of decisions that Special Operations demands." Morrison studied her face with the attention of someone trained to read people under stress. "What kind of decisions?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria knew that Morrison understood exactly what she meant. Special Operations existed in gray areas where right and wrong were often determined by mission success, rather than moral clarity. She had been good at operating in those gray areas, perhaps too good, and that skill had begun to change her in ways she didn't like. "The kind where saving some people means letting others die," Maria said quietly. "Where completing the mission matters more than individual casualties. Where you have to decide who deserves to live based on intelligence reports and strategic priorities." Williams leaned back in her chair. For the record, Sergeant Santos performed her duties with distinction during her time with Special Operations. Her transfer was approved without question, and her current assignment has been exemplary. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had learned. "Santos, Webb said you saved his life. Not just medically, but that you made a choice under fire that kept him alive when you could have prioritized other casualties." The memory came flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. Webb had been the most seriously wounded of the 3 SEALs they had extracted, but he had also been the youngest and least experienced. Standard triage protocol would have suggested focusing on the casualties with the best chance of survival. Instead, Maria had spent precious time and resources on Webb because something in his eyes had reminded her of her younger brother. "I made a medical decision based on the situation at the time," Maria said carefully. "No," Morrison said with certainty. You made a personal decision based on who you thought deserved a chance to live. Webb told me what happened while we were waiting for medevac. You spent 40 minutes working on him while 2 other casualties waited. Standard protocol would have been different. Williams glanced between them with the expression of someone watching a puzzle solve itself. This is why the operation remained classified. Not just because of intelligence concerns, but because it involved decisions that couldn't be easily explained in official reports. Maria felt the weight of judgment in the room, but it wasn't the condemnation she had expected. Morrison's expression showed understanding rather than criticism, the recognition of someone who had faced similar impossible choices. Every special operator makes decisions like that, Morrison said finally. The difference is whether you can live with them afterward. He looked directly at Maria. It sounds like you decided you couldn't. I decided I didn't want to keep having to make them, Maria corrected. There's a difference between being unable to do something and choosing not to do it anymore. Williams closed the folder with a decisive snap. Which brings us to the current situation. Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team operates in the same kind of gray areas you chose to leave behind. The question is whether recent events change your perspective on that choice. The question landed like a physical weight. Maria realized that this conversation had been leading somewhere specific, that Williams and Morrison had discussed possibilities she hadn't considered. The clinical briefing room suddenly felt smaller, and she found herself wondering what exactly they were asking of her. What recent events? Maria asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would complicate her life in ways she wasn't prepared for. Major Williams activated a secure tablet and turned it toward Maria. The screen displayed satellite imagery of a mountainous region she recognized as the border area between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Red markers indicated recent activity, with timestamps showing events from the past 72 hours. 3 days ago, intelligence assets identified a high-value target in this region, Williams began. Someone we've been tracking for 2 years, responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the theater. The target is planning something significant and we have a narrow window to act. Morrison moved closer to the table, his expression growing more serious. The problem is location and timing. The target is meeting with other cell leaders in a compound that's heavily defended and in terrain that makes conventional assault extremely difficult. Maria studied the satellite images, her tactical training automatically analyzing approach routes, defensive positions, and extraction challenges. Despite her desire to leave special operations behind, she couldn't turn off the mental processes that had kept her alive in similar situations. This looks like a job for a much larger force than a SEAL team, Maria observed. Why not call in air support or coordinate with conventional ground units? Williams scrolled to another image showing the compound in greater detail. Because the target isn't just meeting with terrorist cell leaders. Intelligence indicates he's holding 3 American contractors who were captured 6 weeks ago. Any large-scale assault would likely result in their deaths. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place with uncomfortable clarity. Maria could see where this conversation was heading, and every instinct told her to find a way out before she was pulled back into the world she had worked so hard to escape. This requires a small team capable of precise operations, Morrison explained. Medical support that can handle trauma surgery under combat conditions. Someone with experience in joint special operations who understands how these missions work. You have combat medics, Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. Experienced operators who can handle medical emergencies. Not like you, Morrison replied firmly. Webb wasn't exaggerating about what you did during the Kandahar operation. I've read the classified after-action reports. You performed procedures under fire that saved lives other medics would have written off as unsalvageable. Williams leaned forward. More importantly, you've worked with the kind of team that will be necessary for this mission. Rangers, SEALs, Delta Force operators. You understand how they think, how they operate, how they make decisions under extreme stress. Maria felt the familiar weight of impending deployment settling on her shoulders, like an old coat she had hoped never to wear again. The clinical language couldn't hide what they were really asking, for her to return to the world of impossible choices and moral ambiguity that she had deliberately left behind. There are other medics with special operations experience, Maria said. People who haven't specifically requested transfer away from this kind of work. None with your combination of experience and skills, Williams replied, "and none who have worked successfully with the specific operators we need for this mission." She paused meaningfully, including Lieutenant Commander Morrison's team. Morrison's expression showed understanding of Maria's reluctance. "Santos, I know this isn't what you want, but those contractors have families waiting for them to come home. And if this target succeeds in whatever he's planning, a lot more families are going to lose people they care about." The emotional manipulation was subtle but effective. Maria had joined the military to protect people, to serve something larger than herself. The fact that she had chosen a different way to serve didn't change the fundamental motivation that had driven her to enlist in the first place. "What makes you think I'm still capable of operating at that level?" Maria asked. "I've been treating routine injuries and training accidents for 5 years. Special operations medicine is different. More demanding, more immediate." "Your hands haven't forgotten," Williams said simply. "Today, when you treated my team, you worked with the same precision and confidence you showed in Kandahar." "The skills are still there," Morrison added, "and the tactical awareness. You assessed our positions, identified potential threats, and planned for contingencies without even thinking about it. That's not training you lose." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, trying to imagine herself back in that world of night operations and split-second decisions. The thought brought a familiar mixture of adrenaline and anxiety that she had hoped never to feel again. "If I agreed to this," she said carefully, "what would it involve exactly?" Williams pulled up a mission timeline on the tablet. "Insertion by helicopter to a landing zone approximately 8 kilometers from the target compound. Approach on foot under cover of darkness. Simultaneous assault on multiple buildings to secure the hostages and eliminate or capture the high-value target." "Duration?" Maria asked, her medical training automatically calculating logistics requirements. 18 to 24 hours from insertion to extraction," Morrison replied. Assuming everything goes according to plan, Maria almost smiled at that. In her experience, special operations missions rarely went according to plan, which was exactly why teams needed medics who could adapt to changing circumstances and impossible conditions. "What's the team composition?" she asked, realizing even as she spoke that she was already beginning to think operationally rather than defensively. 12 operators total," Williams said. 6 SEALs from Morrison's team, 4 Rangers from the 75th, and 2 Delta Force specialists for breaching and communications. She paused. "Plus 1 combat medic with special operations experience." The numbers were right for the mission profile Williams had described, but Maria knew that 13 people was a lot to insert and extract without being detected. The margin for error would be minimal, and any casualties would complicate an already complex operation. "Timeline for decision?" Maria asked. "We need an answer within 6 hours, Williams replied. "Mission launch is scheduled for tomorrow night. We understand this is a significant decision, but the window of opportunity is narrow." Morrison stood and moved toward the door. "Santos, I want you to know that whatever you decide, there's no judgment from my team. You've already done more than enough for your country. But if you're willing to help us bring those contractors home, we'd be honored to work with you again." After Morrison left, Williams remained seated across from Maria. "I need to ask you directly, is your reluctance based on capability concerns, or is it about the personal cost of returning to this kind of work?" The question was more perceptive than Maria had expected. Williams understood that the issue wasn't whether Maria could do the job, but whether she was willing to pay the emotional and psychological price that special operations demanded. "Both," Maria answered honestly. "I chose to leave this world because it was changing me in ways I didn't like. Going back even temporarily means risking becoming that person again." Williams nodded slowly. "That's a fair concern. But sometimes the person we have to become to save others is worth the personal cost." She gathered her materials and stood. "You have 6 hours to decide who you want to be tomorrow night." Maria spent the next 4 hours walking the perimeter of Bagram Airfield, trying to reconcile the person she had become with the person they needed her to be. The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty landscape and the familiar sounds of military operations provided a backdrop to her internal struggle. Helicopters lifted off and landed in steady rotation, carrying supplies, personnel, and the wounded back and forth across the theater of operations. She found herself at the medical facility where Webb was recovering from surgery. Through the window, She could see him talking quietly with Rodriguez, who had insisted on staying close to his wounded teammate, despite his own shoulder injury. The bond between them was obvious. The kind of trust that came from facing life and death together repeatedly. Dr. Chen found her standing outside the recovery ward. "Tough decision?" she asked, settling beside Maria on a concrete bench that faced the flight line. "How did you know?" Maria asked. "Major Williams spoke with me before she left. She wanted to know about your performance as a medic, your stress tolerance, your ability to work under pressure." Chen studied Maria's profile. "I told her you were one of the best combat medics I'd ever worked with, but that you seemed to carry something heavy from your past." Maria watched a Chinook helicopter lift off in the distance, its twin rotors churning up clouds of dust and debris. "I left special operations because I was tired of having to choose who lived and who died based on mission requirements rather than medical need." "But you're still making those choices," Chen pointed out gently. "Every time we get mass casualties, every time we have to triage patients with limited resources. The difference is context, not responsibility." The observation struck Maria as uncomfortably accurate. Even in her current role, she regularly faced decisions about resource allocation and treatment priorities. The difference was that those decisions were made in sterile medical facilities rather than under enemy fire, with time to consider options rather than seconds to act. "It's not the same," Maria said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No, it's not," Chen agreed. "But maybe that's not the real issue." She turned to face Maria directly. "Maybe the real issue is that you were good at it. Good at making impossible decisions quickly and living with the consequences. And that scared you." Before Maria could respond, Morrison appeared at the entrance to the medical facility. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders that suggested urgency barely held in check. "Santos, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received updated intelligence on the mission." He looked between Maria and Chen. "The timeline has accelerated. We need to launch tonight rather than tomorrow." Maria felt her heart rate spike involuntarily. "What changed?" "The target is moving his meeting forward. Our window to act closes in 18 hours. Morrison's voice carried the weight of command decisions that couldn't be postponed. "I need to know if you're in or out. We have alternative medical support arrangements, but they're not optimal for this kind of operation." Chen stood and excused herself with a meaningful look at Maria. "Whatever you decide, trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this long." Morrison waited until Chen was out of earshot before continuing. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about not wanting to make decisions about who lives and dies based on mission requirements." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What if I told you that your primary responsibility would be to save everyone you could, regardless of mission priorities?" "That's not how special operations works," Maria replied. "Mission success always comes first." "Not this time," Morrison said firmly. "I've spoken with Major Williams and my chain of command. If you join this operation, your medical decisions will take precedence over tactical considerations. We adapt the mission to keep people alive, not the other way around." The offer was unprecedented in Maria's experience. Special operations units didn't typically subordinate mission objectives to individual welfare, especially when strategic targets were involved. The fact that they were willing to do so suggested either desperate circumstances or a fundamental shift in operational philosophy. "Why?" Maria asked. "Why would you risk mission failure to accommodate medical concerns?" Morrison's expression grew serious. "Because Webb told me something else about the Kandahar operation. He said that your refusal to abandon him under fire inspired the rest of the team to fight harder. That seeing someone willing to risk everything to save a teammate made them believe the mission was worth completing." He paused. "Maybe saving people is more important to mission success than we've traditionally believed." A notification alert sounded from Morrison's radio, and he stepped away to take a communication from his command center. Maria used the time to process what he had told her. The idea that her medical decisions could take precedence over tactical requirements challenged everything she understood about special operations culture. Morrison returned with an expression that mixed determination and concern. Santos, I need your decision now. The team is beginning final preparations and we launch in 6 hours. Maria looked through the window at Webb and Rodriguez, two soldiers whose trust in each other had been forged through shared combat and mutual sacrifice. She thought about the 3 American contractors waiting in an enemy compound, their families hoping for news that might never come. And she considered the weight of walking away from people who needed her skills to survive. If I do this, she said finally, I need guarantees that medical decisions will be respected in the field, even if they conflict with tactical objectives. You have my word, Morrison replied immediately, and that of my chain of command. And I need to know that the team understands my role and my authority in medical situations. Already briefed, Morrison confirmed. They know that in matters of life and death, you have final say. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of pre-deployment anxiety settling in her chest. Then I guess I'm going back to work. Morrison's relief was visible but controlled. Thank you. Gear fitting is in 1 hour, mission briefing in 2 hours, final equipment check in 4 hours. As Morrison headed back toward the operations center, Maria remained on the bench for a few more minutes. She was about to step back into a world she had deliberately left behind, but this time with different rules and different priorities. The question was whether those differences would be enough to let her maintain the person she had worked so hard to become. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains surrounding Bagram, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded her of muzzle flashes and tracer rounds. In 6 hours, she would be back in the darkness where life and death decisions were measured in seconds and success was determined by how many people came home alive. She stood and walked toward the operations center, each step feeling like a choice between the safety of the past 5 years and the uncertainty of whatever waited in the mountains ahead. The gear room at Bagram brought back memories Maria had worked hard to suppress. The familiar weight of body armor, the precise arrangement of medical supplies, the careful balance between protection and mobility that defined special operations equipment. Her hands moved with muscle memory as she fitted plates into her tactical vest, checked communication equipment, and organized her medical kit according to priority and accessibility. Staff. Sergeant Kyle Martinez from the 75th Rangers helped her adjust the unfamiliar equipment configurations used by the Joint Task Force. He was younger than Maria remembered being when she left Special Operations, but his eyes carried the same watchful intensity she recognized in long-term operators. Ma'am, I've read the after-action reports from Kandahar, Martinez said quietly as he checked the attachment points on her gear. My squad leader was there that night. He said what you did for those SEALs was something special. Maria focused on organizing her medical supplies, using the familiar routine to calm her pre-mission nerves. I did my job, Sergeant. Nothing more. With respect, ma'am, performing emergency surgery under fire while carrying wounded operators to an extraction point goes beyond standard medical duties. Martinez handed her a communications headset configured for the team's encrypted frequencies. The whole Ranger Battalion knows that story. The revelation surprised Maria. She had assumed that the classified nature of the Kandahar operation meant details would remain restricted to the immediate participants. Learning that her actions had become part of Ranger Regiment lore was both humbling and uncomfortable. Morrison entered the gear room with the rest of his SEAL team. The atmosphere shifted as the operators began their final equipment checks, with the methodical precision that characterized elite units preparing for combat. Maria found herself studying their faces, looking for signs of doubt or concern about working with someone who had been away from Special Operations for 5 years. Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Torres, Morrison's communications specialist, approached Maria with a handheld radio unit. Doc, this is your primary comm device. It's configured for all team frequencies plus dedicated medical channels for casualty evacuation coordination. Any changes to standard medical protocols for this operation? Maria asked, testing the radio's reception and clarity. Negative, Torres replied. Standard NATO battlefield medical procedures, with the understanding that your medical decisions take priority over tactical considerations when lives are at stake. The mission briefing room was crowded with 13 operators, support personnel, and intelligence specialists. Major Williams stood before a large display screen, showing detailed satellite imagery of the target compound and surrounding terrain. The professional atmosphere couldn't entirely mask the tension that accompanied high-risk operations with narrow margins for error. Current intelligence indicates the target compound houses approximately 15 to 20 enemy combatants. Williams began, using a laser pointer to highlight key features. The 3 American hostages are believed to be held in this central building, while the high-value target conducts meetings in the southern structure. Morrison stepped forward to address tactical considerations. Insertion will be by helicopter at Landing Zone Alpha, approximately 8 kilometers northwest of the target. We'll move on foot using night vision equipment, with planned arrival at the compound at 0200 hours local time. Maria studied the terrain between the landing zone and the target, automatically calculating evacuation routes and identifying potential casualties collection points. The mountainous landscape offered good concealment, but would complicate medical evacuation if the operation went wrong. Medical support plan? Asked Master Sergeant James Wright, one of the Delta Force operators assigned to the mission. Williams nodded toward Maria. Staff Sergeant Santos will accompany the assault team and provide immediate trauma care as needed. Primary casualty evacuation will be by helicopter to this location. She indicated a position on the map, with secondary evacuation options available if the primary site is compromised. The briefing continued with detailed discussions of communication protocols, contingency plans, and rules of engagement. Maria found herself slipping back into operational thinking, considering medical scenarios and planning for different casualty situations. Despite her 5-year absence from special operations, the mental processes felt familiar and strangely comforting. After the formal briefing, Morrison gathered the team for a final coordination session. The operators arranged themselves in a circle, and Maria noticed how their body language reflected years of working together under extreme conditions. Trust was visible in their relaxed postures and direct eye contact. Santos, any medical concerns about the mission profile? Morrison asked. Terrain will complicate evacuation if we have serious casualties, Maria replied. The helicopter landing zones are limited and ground movement with wounded would be extremely difficult. Petty Officer First Class Mike Chen, Morrison's second-in-command, leaned forward. What do you need from us to minimize those risks? Clear communication about injuries as they occur, immediate establishment of casualty collection points, and flexibility in tactical planning if medical priorities require changes to the operational timeline. The team nodded their understanding, and Maria realized that their acceptance of her authority in medical matters was genuine rather than perfunctory. Morrison had clearly prepared them for a different kind of operation, one where saving lives took precedence over traditional tactical considerations. As the operators dispersed to complete final preparations, Webb appeared beside Maria. He was supposed to be in medical recovery, but had apparently convinced the doctors to release him for light duty. You shouldn't be here, Maria told him firmly. You're not cleared for operations. I'm not going on the mission, Webb replied. But I wanted to talk to you before you left. He looked around the briefing room, ensuring they had privacy. That night in Kandahar, when you chose to work on me instead of following standard triage protocols, you saved my life. But more than that, you showed me what it means to value individual soldiers over mission objectives. Maria felt uncomfortable with the praise. I made a medical decision based on the circumstances at the time. No, Webb said firmly. You made a moral decision to treat me as a person worth saving, rather than a tactical asset to be managed. He paused. That decision changed how I think about military service. It reminded me that we're fighting for individual people, not abstract strategic objectives. The conversation was interrupted by Torres announcing final equipment checks. Maria gathered her gear and joined the team's movement toward the helicopter flight line. As they walked through the darkness of Bagram Airfield, she found herself wondering whether the person she had been 5 years ago was someone she could be again, even temporarily. The helicopter engines were spinning up as the team approached the aircraft. Maria climbed aboard and secured herself in the familiar web seating that would carry her back into the world she had tried to leave behind. Around her, 12 elite operators prepared for a mission that would test everything they had trained for. As the helicopter lifted off and turned toward the mountains, Maria looked out at the lights of Bagram growing smaller below. In a few hours, she would discover whether 5 years of trying to heal rather than fight had changed her too much to be effective when lives depended on split-second decisions and precise action under fire. The helicopter flight to the insertion point took 90 minutes through mountain valleys that twisted like black rivers between snow-capped peaks. Maria sat in tactical silence with the rest of the team, each operator lost in personal preparations for what lay ahead. The familiar pre-combat routine helped calm her nerves, checking equipment one final time, reviewing medical protocols, and mentally rehearsing responses to different casualty scenarios. At 30 hours, the helicopter flared for landing in a rocky clearing that offered concealment from enemy observation posts. The team moved off the aircraft with practiced efficiency, and within seconds the helicopter disappeared back into the darkness, leaving 13 operators alone in hostile territory with 8 kilometers of difficult terrain between them and their objective. Morrison took point as the team began moving through the rocky landscape using night vision equipment. Maria found her position in the middle of the formation, close enough to respond quickly to casualties but protected by operators both front and rear. The weight of her gear felt familiar despite 5 years away from field operations, and her body remembered the rhythm of tactical movement across broken ground. 2 hours later, they reached an observation position overlooking the target compound. Through her night vision scope, Maria could see the buildings exactly as they had appeared in satellite imagery. A central structure where the hostages were believed to be held, surrounded by smaller buildings housing enemy combatants and equipment. Morrison's hand signals indicated the beginning of the assault phase. The team separated into 3 elements. Chen would lead 4 operators against the hostage building. Wright would take 4 more to neutralize the high-value target, and Morrison would provide overwatch with the remaining operators. Maria would move with Morrison's element until casualties required her attention elsewhere. The synchronized assault began at exactly 0200 hours. Maria watched through her scope as the 2 assault elements moved toward their objectives with the silent precision that characterized elite units. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Then the shooting started. The compound erupted in muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of automatic weapons fire. Morrison's radio crackled with reports from both assault elements encountering heavier resistance than intelligence had predicted. Maria counted at least 6 defensive positions that hadn't appeared in the satellite imagery, suggesting the enemy had been expecting some kind of attack. "Doc, we've got casualties in the hostage building." Chen's voice came through Maria's headset with urgent clarity. 2 wounded, 1 serious. "Can you get to us?" Morrison immediately began coordinating movement to support the assault elements. "Santos, you're with Torres and Martinez. Get to Chen's position and handle the casualties." "Right, what's your status?" "Target building secured. High-value target neutralized," Wright reported. "But we've got wounded civilians in here. The hostages have been tortured. They need immediate medical attention." Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied combat medical situations. Around her, the team moved with coordinated precision toward the compound, while she calculated medical priorities based on radio reports. 2 wounded operators, 3 injured hostages, all requiring immediate attention in an active combat zone. The movement to the hostage building required crossing 50 meters of open ground under sporadic enemy fire. Maria followed Torres and Martinez as they bounded from cover to cover, her medical kit bouncing against her hip with each movement. The weight of her equipment felt lighter now, her body remembering the efficiency of movement that came from months of combat operations. Inside the hostage building, Maria found chaos that was all too familiar. Chen knelt beside Petty Officer Rodriguez, who had taken shrapnel in his chest and was struggling to breathe. Nearby, Sergeant First Class Johnson from the Rangers lay unconscious with what appeared to be a serious head injury from an improvised explosive device. The 3 American contractors huddled in a corner, 2 conscious but clearly traumatized, the 3rd unconscious with visible signs of prolonged abuse and malnutrition. Maria's medical training immediately began triaging the casualties, but she found herself facing exactly the kind of impossible choice she had left special operations to avoid. Rodriguez needed immediate chest surgery to repair damaged lung tissue. Johnson required evacuation to a neurosurgical facility within the hour, or he would likely die. The unconscious hostage showed signs of internal bleeding that demanded immediate intervention. All three needed her immediate attention, but she could only work on one at a time. "Doc, what do you need?" Chen asked, maintaining security while she worked. Maria knelt beside Rodriguez first, her hands automatically beginning the procedures necessary to relieve pressure on his damaged lung. "Get me a secure perimeter and clear communication with the evacuation helicopter. We need immediate extraction for all casualties." As she worked on Rodriguez, Maria could hear Morrison coordinating the team's movement toward the extraction point. The enemy resistance was stronger than anticipated, and the timeline for evacuation was becoming compressed by the need to avoid reinforcements from nearby enemy positions. "Santos, how long do you need?" Morrison's voice carried the tension of a commander, balancing tactical necessities against medical requirements. Maria inserted a chest tube into Rodriguez while simultaneously assessing Johnson's head injury. The unconscious hostage would require abdominal surgery that couldn't be performed in the field. She was facing exactly the kind of triage decision that had driven her away from special operations, choosing who lived based on tactical constraints rather than medical need. But something was different this time. Instead of being forced to choose based on mission priorities, she found herself thinking about Webb's words regarding the Kandahar operation, about Morrison's promise that medical decisions would take precedence over tactical considerations, about the possibility that saving everyone was more important than completing the mission quickly. "I need 40 minutes to stabilize all casualties for transport," Maria announced over the radio. "Rodriguez needs surgery, Johnson needs neurosurgical evaluation, and the hostage needs abdominal repair. But I can get them all stable enough for helicopter evacuation if the team can hold our position." There was a pause before Morrison responded. "Understood. We'll establish a defensive perimeter and wait for your medical clearance before moving to extraction." The decision represented a fundamental shift from everything Maria had experienced in special operations. Instead of adapting medical care to tactical timelines, the team was adapting tactical plans to medical requirements. Morrison was keeping his promise that saving lives would take priority over mission efficiency. Over the next 38 minutes, Maria performed field surgery on 3 critical patients while gunfire continued around the compound. Her hands moved with precision born from years of trauma medicine, but her mind remained focused on the revolutionary idea that she could make medical decisions based purely on patient need, rather than tactical constraints. Rodriguez responded well to chest surgery and was conscious and stable within 20 minutes. Johnson's head injury required careful monitoring but didn't need immediate neurosurgical intervention. The hostage responded to fluid replacement and blood pressure support, though he would need extensive surgery once they reached a proper medical facility. When the evacuation helicopter arrived, all 6 casualties were stable and ready for transport. As Maria helped load the wounded onto the aircraft, she realized that the mission had succeeded not despite her medical decisions, but because of them. The team's willingness to prioritize saving lives had created the trust and coordination necessary for mission success. During the flight back to Bagram, Morrison settled beside Maria in the helicopter's medical bay. "You did something remarkable tonight," he said over the engine noise. "You proved that saving everyone doesn't compromise the mission, it makes it worth completing." Maria looked around the aircraft at the wounded operators and rescued hostages, who were alive because tactical flexibility had accommodated medical necessity. For the first time in 5 years, she felt like her skills had been used in complete alignment with her values, rather than in conflict with them. "Maybe there's a different way to do special operations," she replied. "One where the mission succeeds because we refuse to leave people behind, not despite that refusal." As Bagram Airfield appeared in the distance, Maria realized that her choice to return to special operations hadn't required her to become someone she didn't want to be. Instead, it had allowed her to help transform special operations into something that honored both mission success and human dignity. The silence she had maintained for 5 years had been broken not by force, but by the discovery that her voice could help create the change she had always wanted to see.